online, on the TuneIn app,
and on your smart speaker.
Play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
You're listening to the Shock News Show with Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner and Noah Buckingham. Read your top stories at just after 7 o'clock today. The US says a ceasefire agreement has been reached to end 15 months of fighting in Gaza. The apparent breakthrough follows weeks of negotiations between Hamas and Israel in Qatar to release hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners being freed. The Prime Minister has ruled out holding any kind of emergency budget after UK borrowing costs soared. The government has been given some relief, however, with inflation falling unexpectedly last month. A 30-year-old has admitted careless driving after a toddler was killed in the West Midlands last month. The little boy, who was 2, was knocked down by Sharjeel Shahzad and in a Porsche in Smethwick. He's denied causing death by dangerous driving. Michael Martin is to return as Ireland's Prime Minister. The Fianna Fáil leaders struck a coalition deal with rivals Fine Gael. And Prince William has been praising medical staff at the College of Paramedics, where he's become a patron. He's paid tribute to those working in highly stressful circumstances.
Shock Radio weather.
There'll be clear periods at first this evening, but mist and fog patches will develop this evening and especially after midnight. It'll be colder than last night with some frost possible where skies remain clear. Well, you are listening to the Shock News Show with Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner and Noah Buckingham Reid. We are starting with that story coming out of Israel this evening. A ceasefire agreement has been reached, according to a Hamas official. The deal will include a 6-week initial ceasefire phase, the gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces and hostages held by both sides to be released. We had a very different show planned earlier on today, and then we got this news through just a short while ago, and it's completely changed. What are your initial reactions to this news of a ceasefire?
The initial reaction is that it's good for the region. It means that people in Gaza can, at some point, safely go back to their home, while we're seeing a now end to the potential war that's been going on for the last 15 months. Whether or not, to be pessimistic, whether or not it will continue is to be questioned, because in the past we've had ceasefire agreements, especially in the last 15 months, where they've been agreed upon, the diplomatic process has continued, and then while the ceasefire was ongoing, one of the two, Israel or Hamas, has started a new barrage of attacks. So whether or not it will continue further and potentially end the current war is to be seen, because it is also an extended war. This isn't just what's happened in the last 15 months, it's what's happened in the last hundreds of years between Israel and Palestine over land and resources. So it is going to be interesting to see how it plays out, but we're looking at potentially relief in the Middle East.
And I think sort of beyond that, it's the whole region which has been sort of so heavily impacted by this being the epicenter of action, the epicenter of destruction, and the epicenter of essentially unrest and disagreement within the region. We've seen Israel sort of, we saw them in Lebanon earlier I say earlier in the year, we're in 2025, but in 2024, and we saw disruption from Iran and sort of agitation, and then we saw the major story from Syria. And I think what hopefully this means now is that with a solid ceasefire agreement in place, this sort of center of disagreement can now mean that diplomacy is the primary action, and there's sort of less anger and vitriol in the center of negotiation from all sides, and even outside of Israel and Palestine. But I think this is a great first step, and hopefully it can be followed up on for something very permanent.
Well, we've told that the deal would take about 48 hours to implement, which would end the war, which has been going on now for 15 months. Earlier on today, the Israeli President Isaac Herzog said he was due to meet with the International Red Cross leader to prepare for the deal and transfer of hostages. So I think we had the initial announcement from Hamas. We've had now Israel come back and speaking quite positive about it, wanting to go and meet the Red Cross. So I think it's looking quite serious, and I think lots of people in the area and internationally will be very, very pleased to hear that. But it isn't the first time we've had a situation like this where Israel and Hamas, Israel and Gaza, have reached this a sort of agreement, a ceasefire, a peace deal, only for it to be broken a few months, years down the line.
Yeah, in the past, the relations between, or the conflict within Israel and Gaza has been relatively off the map. It's been quite calm because until October 7th, there was a long understanding peace agreement between the two sides. And then October 7th happened, and then we were in this 15-month conflict. So whether or not we'll go back to something like that is something to be questioned. But the hope is that especially from Qatar and the US, it will go to something like that to bring a sense of peace within the region, because it isn't just what's happening in Gaza. It is the Middle East as a whole is sort of in this state of conflict between its neighbouring countries.
And I think maybe... going forward, that now that this is a deal, how they maintain it might still be difficult. We see that maybe this might save any sort of dwindling popularity that Benjamin Netanyahu may have had, and it may protect him in that role. And I think he will maintain his view that he doesn't feel, or his argument that the Israeli state is not safe when there is a hostile state next to it, or a hostile government, or a hostile terrorist organization, as he would frame it, in Hamas. And also, Hamas will not probably, in this case of a ceasefire, not let up on their belief that this is that they still don't like this idea of a two-state solution. They still feel Israel is a hostile state towards them.
Well, we have heard from Benjamin Netanyahu today. He said that some clauses of the deal are still unresolved, and Hamas has backed down on its demand at the last minute over the deployment of forces on what's called the Philadelphia Corridor. So that's a little strip between southern Gaza and Egypt. It was used to evacuate lots of civilians over the last year or so when their camps have been targeted, or they've had the threat of strikes put on them. We've got now defence analyst Professor Michael Clark. He's been looking at the numbers for the hostage releases.
It looks as if 3 hostages will be released in the first week. And they've said that Israel will release 30 Palestinian detainees for every civilian hostage and 50 Palestinian detainees for every Israeli female soldier that Hamas releases.
So just to clarify that, the deal could look like that for every citizen hostage released by Hamas, 30 Palestinian prisoners will be released. And for every serving IDF soldier, 50 Palestinian prisoners would be released. And whilst we've had diplomats and politicians in Israel agree on this, they will vote on the deal in Parliament tomorrow. I'd just like to bring you both back in again. Do you think this will get passed tomorrow, or do you think there'll be some people within the Israeli government and their parliament who will be dissatisfied with it?
I think it will get passed. There will be some who are dissatisfied, but especially within Israel, there is a lot of tension between what is happening in the Gaza Strip. A lot of people in Israel do want this current fight to end because they don't agree with how it's being dealt with. They still believe that the diplomacy of Gaza should be with Israel, but they don't agree with how it's being currently fought for. So in the people's mind, there is this sense that they want this to end. But obviously it has to go through the government in Israel. When it goes through the government, then it'll basically be finalised. We are currently looking at phase 1 being finalised. It looks to be 3 phases. Phase 1 is that initial release of the hostages and the prisoners. Then it will look at towards the release of IDF members and other important figures in Israel from Hamas, and then we'll look at the rebuild of Gaza. But it will take years. It will take a while for all 3 phases to begin. So for this first phase to begin, it's vital to the safety of Gaza, but also for the diplomacy of the Middle East.
And I think what's really important in that is that we don't forget how much this is an impact on the place. There's 47,000 people. I think the numbers are completely in this situation, we have to really consider those numbers. We have to really sort of give time to really think about what has been done here. There's 47,000 people have been killed in the region. The Gaza Strip, as it's been reported, has essentially been flattened. I think if we compare the numbers, Israel says there's 94 hostages who are still being held by Hamas, of whom 34 are presumed dead. This is 94 people compared to, I think we saw the numbers there, that it's 30 Palestinian prisoners released. I think that just the scale of this atrocity over the last 15 months, over this conflict in the last 15 months, is now, I don't think that should be forgotten in this sort of foreign diplomatic world of phases and rebuilds and positive speak from people like Joe Biden, who's made a statement in the last hour. And I think what we need to remember now is what happened here and how we can work to make sure that something similar doesn't happen again, and especially doesn't happen again within the region.
Absolutely. Well, a little bit earlier we heard from the Qatari Prime Minister, who confirmed that the ceasefire deal would start on Sunday the 19th.
It will include a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli forces to the east, away from populated areas. Israeli forces will then be positioned along the Gaza border, and which will allow for the swap of prisoners as well as the swap of remains and the return of the displaced people to their residences.
And Qatar will continue to work with Egypt and the United States to ensure that all sides follow through with their commitments to this deal. Biden, as you say, just finished speaking in Washington, and we might be able to discuss some of the things he said in just a little bit. Starmer has released a statement as well. He said, after months of devastating bloodshed and countless lives lost, this is long overdue news. Donald Trump has also made a thank you post on his own platform, Truth Social, saying in big, bold capital letters, "We have a deal for the hostages. Thank you." He'd previously said that all hell would break loose if the hostages were not released before his inauguration. And we'll be discussing some of that press conference in a little while and some of the other claims he made during that. And celebrations tonight have broken out in Gaza, which is no surprise really, because after 15 months, they're finally starting to see a way out, really.
Yeah. And it also means, obviously, celebrations are happening because of this sort of new era of what's going to be in the Gaza Strip, of what it will look like. But also a lot of people are celebrating hostages being brought home in Israel, especially. So we're seeing both sides celebrate, not only those in Gaza.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to speaking about that Trump press conference that happened a week ago, where one of the things he said was that if the hostages weren't freed by his inauguration, there would be hell to pay. But that wasn't the only big thing he said during that conference, where he was mainly outlining new foreign policy. One point he made is to change Joe Biden's offshore oil ban on day one of his presidency. Here's him talking about that.
They had 2 whales wash ashore in, I think, a 17-year period, and now they had 14 this season. The windmills are driving the whales crazy, obviously.
It's quite a bold claim that offshore wind is driving marine life crazy. What are your guys' initial reaction to that?
We kind of know that Donald Trump has his views on climate change, so as shock as it is, it's not a massive deal breaker for him. During his last term, he did sort of push policies that went against climate change, climate change renewal sort of thing, and keeping it out of everyone's mind. So he did sort of start the process in his last term, but for when he said that, it obviously caused a little bit of a disruption, and he doesn't like how Biden's brought this new bill in, where he's doing it very quickly near the end of his term to sort of try and, in his sense, try and distract and trying to prevent some of his own policies that he was elected on in the last election.
Right, so I think a lot of what Trump has said through his election campaign and now in this sort of transition period a lot of people like to sort of say, let's judge him by his actions. Let's see what happens when he comes in. I mean, we know that Trump can talk a big game, but will he deliver? Who's going to be there to sort of control what he can and can't do? But I think what he says here is really important, and it's important across both. What he was saying is almost a threat in this ceasefire deal, or in this idea which he was going to rain hell on the Middle East, or these sort of ideas. We have to take those very seriously, because as an American president, it's almost as important as to what you say as to what you can actually do. I think your power as a US president is often more soft power than we think. You're more the major foreign global diplomat. And I think what we don't want to see here is him leading the way on these sort of anti-climate, climate skeptical ideologies which are sort of coming into the US sphere and therefore around the world. And I think, it's sort of epitomized by what we've seen in LA in the last week and last 2 weeks of those fires, and how climate is actually now reaching the people on the ground in America. You can't sort of stop climate from. You can push away these things to the Middle East. You can push away conflict and radical ideology, but you can't push away is climate. And I think what this might do is potentially wake some more people up to the idea that we need to take what Trump says very seriously, and what he says does have consequences, whether they're enacted or not.
Well, another point that Trump made at this conference last week was that he criticised NATO's members' spending on defence, and kind of said that the US was the world's defender. This is what he said.
If the deal isn't done before I take office, which is now going to be 2 weeks, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
Apologies, that was the wrong clip. Let me play the right one.
If you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%. I think they should be, they're in dangerous territory. I think they can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%.
Yes, he suggested that member states should raise defence spending to 4% of their GDP rather than the current 2%. In this, he's been backed by Poland, but other people in Europe are less keen. Do you think we're kind of seeing an era where the US is moving away from being sort of the world's policeman? We've seen between Israel and Hamas today and over the last few months that Qatar has been the peacekeeper there rather than the US. Do you think we're seeing a sort of wider global shift here?
Absolutely. US has been a big part of the agreement that's been agreed today, but it's not been the main player. It was very similar back when the Lebanon ceasefire was agreed, because that was brokered by France. So the US will play a major part in any future negotiations regarding defence, but it doesn't play the major sort of key holder effect that it used to. So we are seeing a massive shift, especially with the powers like NATO increasing its prominence around the world, with the likes of Ukraine wishing to join NATO, something that Donald Trump is very much against during the current war in Ukraine and Russia.
Well, I think it's very interesting. He sort of takes this isolationist stance when, 5 minutes later in the speech, he talks about wanting to take Greenland, and he wants to take Greenland from Denmark, and he wants to. He's talked about reclaiming the Panama Canal because of perceived Chinese influence. He's talked about annexing Canada, right, and claiming that the Gulf of Mexico is the Gulf of America. I think he's an isolationist as much as he feels that it impacts him. And I think what his aim as the new American president will be is to exercise his soft power over these regions. But what he doesn't want to do is spend any money on it. So I think what he thinks he can do is sort of buff defense spending and mark it as a defense of America, but no one else. But actually, I think he wants to have his cake and eat it. I mean, it's a playing both sides. So it's really difficult to sort of plant anything that makes sense in two sentences with Donald Trump. But I think it'll be interesting what he does when he does take office.
And those claims about Greenland, Canada, Mexico, and the Panama Canal are just things you would not expect to hear from someone about to become US president. And over the last few months, Donald Trump has been surrounding himself with a group of people I'm going to call the tech bros. We've seen Mark Zuckerberg fall in line. He's fired Nick Clegg and replaced him with someone with a big history in Republican politics. And also Elon Musk, who will be in his cabinet leading the Department of Government Efficiency. Doge.
Don't forget to call it Doge.
Awful name. But whilst Trump's been making these threats to foreign nations, Elon Musk has been meddling in British politics a little bit. He's accused Keir Starmer of complicity in failing to tackle the grooming gangs scandal, which in the last few weeks has blown up again, having been pretty much silent for 3 or 4 years. What do you guys make of this big effort from Trump and from Musk to kind of meddle in British politics specifically?
Right. Well, I think it's really important that we sort of contextualise first. And the issue of grooming gangs in the UK became notably sort of public around 2010, 2011, with the high-profile cases in towns like Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford. And these cases involved groups of men predominantly of Pakistani heritage engaging in the systematic sexual exploitation of young, often vulnerable white girls. This is, now we're talking 14, 15 years ago, right? At the time, there was inquiries. There's been local inquiries. There was a national inquiry, which the Tories actually implemented as none of those recommendations which were made. So I think that why it's come back up in the news is, again, it feels like politically opportunistic. And that has sort of been the key word of this, of Kemi Badenoch's leadership of the Tory party, and also now of Elon Musk trying to sort of bump up reform, right? And it feels that these cases are brought up when it feels convenient for them to be taken advantage of politically. And, it's potentially foreign influence, but not just foreign influence, but I think it's actually real monetary influence, which we've denied for so long in the UK. We've denied these sort of multi-billion-dollar presidential-like election campaigns. We've kept sort of the many traditions of British elections. And what I think now it would be very damaging to democracy as a whole if we began sort of letting these big figures, but I think more than just big influential figures that aren't politically aligned with us, but more that there is huge amounts of money which could potentially be funneled in to these political campaigns and these messaging and the rest of it.
And it's this really emotive language he's using as well. Jess Phillips is apparently a rape genocide apologist, and this is because she had rejected a new national inquiry into the scandal, despite there being one that finished in 2022 when Kemi Badenoch, the now Tory Tory leader of the opposition, was Minister for Women and Equalities. Jess Phillips has hit back at Elon Musk's claims and that he should personally crack on getting to Mars. Here's what she had to say.
I am in no way against whatever will make that happen. But where is the evidence when we had a national inquiry and still 2 years of their government, nothing changed?
She's also called it a political football with a call for action.
It's painful to watch it become a political football rather than an actual attempt to really do something.
And I think one of the weirdest tweets I saw from Elon Musk about this, are they tweets, zeets, whatever they are, he put a poll out saying that, asking whether when Donald Trump gets into office, he should take Britain by force and liberate the British public. And 58% of the respondents said yes, which I think is a little bit worrying. Yeah, it's completely mad. He's said that Starmer failed to deliver with the grooming gang scandal whilst he was head of the CPS. That was when one of the first inquiries was launched and when lots of this started to come to the fore. And he's actually called for Keir Starmer to be imprisoned, which is nuts. This is someone who is about to become an American politician.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to note here there's already been 10 reports or inquiries, the first one being from the Home Affairs Select Committee back in 2013. And since then, we've had multiple reports from either inquiries or from investigations that say very different things that haven't been implemented by consecutive governments. Whether or not a new inquiry would fix that is to be known. The Tories have asked for a new one, but Labour aren't wanting to do that because if there's already been 10 and the things haven't already been implemented, they'd rather go back on that and implement them rather than have a new inquiry that would be very expensive to the public purse when Labour are really keen on lowering public finances. And it would also take a long time. Some of these inquiries take 10 years for any sort of effect or any sort of resolution to come by. So we are seeing that a lot of the sort of now opposition are saying, hold an inquiry for this because it not fits our political motive, but helps our political campaign of why does Labour have to hold a new inquiry. So I think Keir Starmer's been very careful on how to sort of run around this issue, but it's also a case of he's having to consider the impact and the influence that these billionaires and multimillionaires are having on the UK political system, with Elon Musk previously promising reform a multi-million-pound deal to help their party into the next election, which Nigel Farage wants to win outright.
Well, let's hear Starmer kick back against Musk and other critics.
Those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, they're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case.
And just before we end the show, I want to talk briefly about PMQs, which obviously happened earlier today. Earlier this week, former Prime Minister Liz Truss sent a legal cease and desist letter to Sir Keir Starmer for demanding he stop saying she crashed the economy. Her lawyers have argued that the claim made by Sir Keir is false and defamatory and that he harmed her politically in the run-up to losing her seat in the election last year. Keir Starmer wasn't taking it particularly seriously when he mentioned it in the chamber earlier today.
I got a letter this week from a Tory voter in a Labour seat. I hope they don't mind me saying who it was. It was Liz Truss. It wasn't written in green ink, but it might as well have been. She was complaining that saying she crashed the economy was damaging her reputation. It was actually crashing the economy that damaged her reputation.
It's good that even though we've got these big political, serious stories today, we can have a little chuckle about Liz Truss, I think.
Yeah. I mean, she has made herself the fool of the British political system over the last sort of 50 years. You have to go back a while to even think about someone else who's made such a mess that is comically funny to be able to laugh at. So, but it is a precedent that she has written, her lawyers has written a formal letter to say, stop saying I did this because it hurt me in the past. It really speaks volumes about her motive, and it really does say a lot about whether or not she is going to make a fight back in 2029 to regain the seat, or if she's just going to use the next 5 years as a sort of political weapon against the Labour Party and potentially further.
I love that our free speech absolutist, Liz Truss in the building, has said, you know what, you can't say that. You can't say that. It's great. I think if we get a new feature of favourite political story of the week or of the year, I think 2 weeks in, I might have already ticked that box, because Liz Truss, she's just like the thing that keeps on delivering. What's the thing for that? The thing that keeps on pulling out something new.
Gift that keeps on giving.
Gift that keeps on giving. There you go. And that is Liz Truss for you. Any serious political sense, I think it's quite amusing. And unfortunately, if she wants to dispute that she did crash the economy, then I'm not sure how you measure that. I was listening to the news agency who did a full 40-minute special on whether this actually would stand up in the court of law. I think they concluded that it depends how you judge it by, because I think they had sort of a Liz Truss sympathiser lawyer who was quite keen on the fact that if she crashed the economy, can't we say that Rachel Reeves has crashed the economy? I think that's the other Big story for the week, but I
Yes.
think we can probably save that one.
Yeah, let's save that until next week. And before we get to the headlines, just cover a little bit of local news. Earlier on today, there was a gas leak in central Manchester. The city centre was cordoned off this afternoon. It was on John Dalton Street, just down the road from Deansgate. It was caused by damage to a gas main after a workman was pulling through a live gas pipe with a digger. It's now been repaired, but it caused a lot of disruption today. We know people that were caught in traffic, and none of the buses were working. It's not very ideal, but it's all been sorted now. But there was a big evacuation and a cordon earlier on today, and the Botanist at Media City is set to close. The owners of the chain have issued a statement claiming that the closure is the result of the landlord's decision to seek new tenants as part of their company voluntary agreement process. It's the fourth site that the Botanist has announced will close in the last 2 weeks, but they'll be opening a new store in Sheffield soon. Have you guys ever been to the Botanist in Media City? It's right next to our campus.
What do they do?
It's
Is it a restaurant?
Yeah.
From what I was
Okay,
from what I was reading, it was botanical cocktails was the main thing. I can't say I've personally used it, but it suggests it now means there's no branch of the Botanist in Greater Manchester. It kind of does suggest how we're moving in the current economy towards potential further shutdowns. Hopefully not in Media City, but around Greater Manchester, you know, people are still hailing and used to hail Greater Manchester as the new media headquarters of the UK, but especially in the north. So we are seeing this shift of, will it continue to be that, or will it be anywhere in the UK can prosper to become a media revolution?
Looks like Dry January's already taken a kick on our economy, guys.
Dry January. Just close all the pubs. Close all the
Loads
bars.
of pubs. Who needs them?
Well, you have been listening to the Shock News Show. Let's end with another look at the top stories at just gone 7:30. After more than a year of fighting in Gaza, a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been confirmed by the Qatari government. The agreement, which involves the release of hostages and Palestinian prisoners, will take effect from Sunday. An investigation is underway after a female parliamentary researcher allegedly had her drink tampered with. Scotland Yard is looking into an incident at the bar in the Palace of Westminster last week. There's been some reprieve for the Chancellor with the rate at which prices have been slowing in the last month. Inflation came in at 2.5% in December, down from 2.6% in November. Carlsberg's takeover of British drinks firm Britvic has been given the go-ahead by a High Court judge. The competition watchdog approved the deal in December after shareholders at the J2O maker gave their backing last August. And Conclave is dominating this year's BAFTA nominations with 12 nods. Ralph Fiennes, who plays a clergyman in the film, is up for Best Actor. You've been listening to the Shock News Show. The producer was Luke Jones. I've been Alfie Mulcahy, joined by Alfie Garner and Noah Buckingham Reid. We'll see you next week.